carried the stigma of being called a prostitute's daughter. They beat Ononye to a pulp till she fell to the ground unconscious. Once upon a time, there lived a very beautiful girl named Ononye. Ononye was the daughter of a popular prostitute who died after a brief illness many years ago. Ononye lived alone in the village and carried the stigma of being called a prostitute's daughter. She never had friends in the village, as all the women warned their daughters to stay away from her, as they believed that she was cursed with the spirit of prostitution. One day, Ononye was returning home from the farm when two girls from the village surrounded her and accused her of prostituting. Ononye, puzzled at the accusation, asked what they were driving at, and one of the girls, named Amara, said to her that she saw Ononye talking to her boyfriend Osita a few days ago. When she confronted Osita, he stated that Ononye was the one who was trying to force herself on him. Ononye could not believe her ears, as Osita was actually the one who tried to force himself on her. He had approached her severally, pleading to be her boyfriend, but Ononye blatantly refused his advances. When Ononye heard this accusation from Amara, she confronted her with the truth, saying that Amara should be the one to warn her boyfriend Osita never to approach her in his life, because the next time he does, she would have no other option but to report him to the village elders. As Ononye was about walking out on Amara and her friend, they picked up some sticks and began to beat her up. They beat Ononye to a pulp till she fell to the ground unconscious. Filled with fear, Amara and her friend ran away from the scene before anyone would see what they had done. Later that night, Ononye woke up in a strange hut and wondered where she was. It was extremely dark and the hut did not look familiar. She called out, and a very handsome man emerged, smiling at her and asking if she felt better. Ononye asked who he was and what she was doing there by that time of the day, and the young man introduced himself to her as Uchendu. He narrated to Ononye how he witnessed all that happened to her with the girls by the bush path and urged her to rest, as she had sustained numerous injuries from the beating. Ononye was so grateful to Uchendu for saving her life, as she thanked him for his kindness. She decided to catch some sleep, as she was still in a lot of pain. By morning, she woke up and noticed that she was all alone in Uchendu's hut. She called out for him, but Uchendu seemed not to be around, so Ononye decided to return back to her hut, as she was feeling a whole lot better. On her way back, she overheard some villagers discussing that the princess of the village, Princess Mma, was going to make her first appearance in public in 2 market days. No one had ever seen the princess before, and everyone anticipated the unveiling ceremony, as what this meant was that time had come for the princess to choose her groom, as the unveiling ceremony only happened when the princess was ripe for marriage. In their village, whenever a princess is to unveil herself to the villagers, a maiden in the village is selected to escort the princess around the village, and whoever is chosen stands a chance of being the princess's personal maiden. All the maidens in the village wanted to be chosen, and everyone was now in their best behavior. One evening, the palace guards announced that all the maidens should appear in front of the king's palace, and when the maidens heard this, they began to troop out in their numbers as they marched to the king's palace. A pregnant woman in that moment sat in the middle of the street, screaming for help, and no one was willing to help her out, as they did not want to miss their chance of being picked by the palace as the princess's personal maiden. The pregnant woman winced in pain as she sat in the middle of the village street, crying for help, but no one cared to help her except Ononye, who could not stand to see the pregnant woman in pain. She assisted the pregnant woman to the village herbalist's hut, and by the time she decided to rush to the palace, she noticed that the palace had already dismissed all the maidens. Sad and disappointed, Ononye returned home as she consoled herself with the fact that she was able to save the life of a pregnant woman. The next morning, Ononye decided to pay Uchendu a visit as she felt terrible for leaving his hut without a word. She traced her way to his hut and met him sitting outside. Uchendu was so pleased to see Ononye as they sat outside his hut, talking and laughing. She told him how she missed appearing before the palace because of a pregnant woman who she had to help, and Uchendu could not believe his ears, as such an act was rare, considering what she stood to lose by helping the pregnant stranger. Uchendu fell in love with Ononye at that moment, as he could not believe someone like her existed in the village. As they were talking, Amara and her friend barged in on them, accusing Ononye of being a prostitute. They called her all sorts of names, warning Uchendu to stay away from her, as she was the daughter of a prostitute who slept with men around the village. Unable to stand the accusations, Ononye ran away from their presence as she cried all the way home. She knew that after what had happened, Uchendu would never want to see her again, and the thought of this broke her heart greatly. The next morning, Ononye was home when some palace guards came to her hut to inform her that her presence was needed at the palace. She was terrified as she wondered why her presence was needed. She arrived at the palace and was informed by the chief guard that the palace had chosen her to escort the princess on the day of her unveiling, and Ononye was puzzled as she wondered how this was possible, considering the fact that she was unable to make it to the palace on the day of the selection. Ononye returned to her hut excited as she could not wait for the day of the princess's unveiling. News of this spread around the village, reaching the ears of Amara, who could not believe that the palace had chosen the daughter of a prostitute to escort the princess on the day of her unveiling. Unable to come to terms with this reality, Amara decided to approach the chief guard of the palace to reveal that Ononye was a prostitute and that the palace cannot allow a prostitute to escort the princess on the day of her unveiling. The chief guard, on hearing this, thanked Amara for the information, saying that Amara would be duly compensated for giving him such a vital information. Amara was so excited as she knew that the palace would never allow Ononye to escort the princess after this revelation. The day of the unveiling arrived, and the whole village gathered at the palace to see their princess for the very first time. As the princess walked out of the palace, Amara was shocked to see the princess walking next to Ononye. She thought her plan had worked, but what she did not know was that the princess was the one who chose Ononye herself to escort her on the day of her unveiling. What had happened was that on the day when the maidens were summoned to the palace, the princess pretended to be a pregnant woman stationed on their path, as she wanted to see if any maiden would be so kind to help her despite what they stood to lose by doing so. All the maidens walked past her as they rushed to the palace, not knowing that she was the princess of the village. Only Ononye was kind enough to stop and help the pregnant woman, and the princess made up her mind in that moment that Ononye was the chosen one. On the morning of the unveiling, when Ononye realized that the princess was the pregnant woman she helped the other night, she bursted out in tears as she could not believe what her act of kindness had done for her. After the unveiling ceremony was over, Princess Mma took Ononye into the palace, saying that she wanted to introduce her to someone. They walked together and arrived at a very large door. The guards opened up the door for them, and Ononye caught sight of Uchendu and realized that Uchendu was the prince of their village. Uchendu all this while pretended to be a poor farmer in the village as he searched for a wife. He would spend his days in his hut in the village and return to the palace at night time. This he did for a while till he met Ononye and fell deeply in love with her. Ononye could not believe all that was happening as it all looked like a dream. In that moment, Ononye's life changed forever as Uchendu asked her to be his bride, and without thinking twice, she agreed. Princess Mma was so excited as they all approached their father the king for his blessings. They explained all that happened to the king and the fact that Ononye was the daughter of a prostitute, and their father the king never seemed to care, saying that no one should ever be judged by the deeds of their parents because no child has control over who their parents would be. That was how Ononye's life changed forever, as Prince Uchendu made a decree in the village that anyone who dared to call Ononye the daughter of a prostitute again would be banished from the village, never to return, and no one dared to defile the prince's order from that day forward. Ononye got married to Prince Uchendu and they lived happily ever after. Amara, on the other hand, lived all her life regretting all the terrible things that she did to Ononye and wished she could undo all the wrongs that she had done. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should never judge a person based on the sins of their parents. In whatever you do in life, ensure to be kind to people because life in itself is unpredictable and no situation is permanent. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Like, subscribe and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.